The canine German Shepherd barked non-stop. When they discovered the reason, it was shocking. Thor, a highly trained canine German Shepherd, wouldn't stop barking. His body was tense, ears pinned forward, eyes locked on an abandoned warehouse. Officer Jake Carter tightened his grip on the leash. He knew his partner wasn't wrong. Then, a faint, muffled cry cut through the silence. Someone was inside. Someone in desperate danger. Before we continue, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories of courage like this one. Now, get ready. Because what Thor was about to uncover would change everything. The wind howled through the deserted alleyways as Officer Jake Carter and his partner Miller stood outside the old warehouse. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows shattered, rusted metal doors barely hanging onto their hinges. It was supposed to be empty. But Thor knew better. The canine's German Shepherd stood rigid, his muscles coiled like a spring, barking with an intensity that sent chills down Jake's spine. This wasn't just a reaction to some stray animal. This was something serious. Jake's hand rested on his gun as he glanced at Miller. "We need to check this out." Miller hesitated. "This place has been empty for ages. You really think—" Then it happened again. A soft, muffled cry. So faint, it could have been mistaken for the wind. Except Thor heard it first. The dog let out a low, rumbling growl and lunged toward the door, claws scraping against the concrete. Jake's stomach tightened. "That's not the wind," he muttered. "Someone's inside." Thor barked louder, his body straining toward the door. His tail was stiff, his ears locked forward. He was in full protection mode. Jake grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Possible 10:15 inside the abandoned warehouse on Oak Street. Requesting backup." "Copy that, Unit 12. Backup en route. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Jake's fingers curled into a fist. That was too long. The cry came again, clearer this time. And this time he heard words. "Help. Please." A woman's voice, weak, terrified. Thor whimpered, pacing in place. His instincts screamed at him to move. Jake wasn't going to wait. "We're going in," Miller tensed. "Jake, we should—" But Jake was already moving. He grabbed the rusted handle and shoved the door open. A gust of stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of damp wood, rust, and something else. Something metallic. Blood. Jake's heart pounded. "Thor, seek!" The canine didn't hesitate. He darted inside, his nose low, sniffing the air in quick bursts. His ears flicked, tracking every noise. His paws barely made a sound as he moved through the darkness. Then, suddenly, he stopped. Thor's body went rigid, his tail pointing straight out like an arrow. He growled, a deep, warning snarl. Jake flicked on his flashlight and froze. A figure sat slumped against the far wall. A woman. Her wrists were tied, a cloth stuffed into her mouth, her white habit torn and stained with dirt. A nun. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Miller, get over here now!" Thor barked, his stance shifting into protection mode, standing between the woman and the shadows beyond. Jake could barely see her face, but he saw the fear in her eyes. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a floorboard creaked. Jake's grip on his gun tightened. They weren't alone. Someone else was in the warehouse, and they had just realized they weren't alone either. The warehouse was silent, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Officer Jake Carter could hear his own pulse hammering in his ears as he stood frozen, gripping his gun. Thor, his canine partner, remained still, his growl low but steady. The nun, her wrists bound, her face pale with terror, didn't make a sound. Then, another floorboard creaked. Someone was in there with them. Jake flashed his light across the room, illuminating piles of debris, rusted metal beams, and shattered glass. Shadows stretched across the grimy walls, but he saw nothing. "Come out," Jake commanded, his voice firm. "Police, we know you're here." Silence. Thor's ears twitched. Then he lunged forward, barking furiously, his paws skidding against the dusty floor. Jake barely had time to react before a figure burst out from the darkness. A man, dressed in dark clothes, face partially covered, sprinted toward the back of the warehouse. He held something in his hand, something metallic that gleamed under the dim light. A knife. "Drop your weapon," Jake shouted, raising his gun. The man didn't stop. He bolted toward a side exit, kicking over crates and scattering debris in his wake. But Thor was faster. The German Shepherd sprang into action, his powerful legs propelling him forward in a blur of black and tan fur. He dodged the debris effortlessly, his focus locked onto his target. Then, impact. Thor crashed into the man's legs, sending him sprawling onto the floor with a grunt of pain. The knife clattered away, spinning across the concrete. The suspect kicked wildly, trying to shake the dog off, but Thor was trained for this. He latched onto the man's arm, his teeth clamping down just enough to hold without breaking skin. "Thor, hold!" Jake ordered as he rushed forward. Miller was right behind him, his gun trained on the suspect. "Don't move!" The man panted, struggling for breath, but he knew it was over. Jake wasted no time. He holstered his weapon, grabbed the man's hands, and cuffed him with practiced efficiency. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and resisting arrest." Miller picked up the discarded knife, shaking his head. "Guess Thor knew something we didn't." Jake turned his attention back to the nun. She was still slumped against the wall, her breathing shaky. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he could see just how badly shaken she was. There were bruises on her wrists, her face streaked with dirt. He crouched down, his tone softer. "Ma'am, you're safe now. We're the police." Her blue eyes filled with tears, and for the first time she spoke. I thought no one would come." Her voice trembled. "I prayed, and then I heard him." She looked at Thor. The German Shepherd sat beside her, panting, his dark eyes locked onto hers, as if he understood every word. Jake smiled. "Yeah, he has a way of being in the right place at the right time." Miller knelt beside them, pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Suspect in custody. Victim located. Requesting medical assistance." A crackling voice responded. "Copy that, Unit 12. EMS en route. ETA 5 minutes." The nun took a shaky breath, her fingers curling into Thor's thick fur. "He saved me," she whispered. "He wouldn't stop barking. I heard him through the walls." Jake felt a lump in his throat. He had worked with canines for years, and still, moments like this hit hard. Thor hadn't just done his job, he had saved a life. The nun's lips quivered as she looked back at Jake. "Please, what's his name?" Jake smiled, scratching Thor behind the ears. "His name is Thor." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you, Thor," she whispered, stroking his head. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The German Shepherd let out a soft whine and nudged her hand with his nose, as if saying, "I would never give up." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as emergency vehicles approached. The nightmare was over, but as Jake watched the nun clutch onto Thor like a lifeline, he knew one thing for sure. This was more than just a rescue. This was fate. The wail of sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the grimy walls of the warehouse. Officer Jake Carter stood near the entrance, watching as paramedics rushed toward the injured nun. His canine partner, Thor, sat beside him, ears still alert, eyes locked onto the woman as if refusing to leave her side. The suspect lay on the ground, hands cuffed behind his back, his face twisted in frustration. Officer Miller kept a firm grip on his shoulder, ensuring he didn't try anything foolish. The nun, still shaken, struggled to sit up as one of the medics gently touched her arm. "Ma'am, we need to check you for injuries. Can you tell us your name?" Her lips trembled before she whispered, "Sister Clara." Jake crouched down, speaking gently. "Sister Clara, can you tell us what happened? How did you end up here?" Her gaze shifted to Thor, and for a moment, it seemed like she was drawing strength from him. She inhaled deeply, then nodded. "I was leaving the church late last night," she began, her voice still weak. "I volunteer at a shelter a few blocks away, and I always walk back alone." Her eyes flickered with fear. "I didn't see him. I didn't even hear him. Someone grabbed me from behind, covered my mouth before I could scream." Jake's jaw tightened. Coward. The paramedic shined a light into her eyes, checking for signs of concussion as she continued. "He threw me into a van. I don't know how long we drove. When we stopped, I was here. He tied me up, left me in the dark. I could hear him pacing, talking to someone on the phone. He kept saying something about needing more time." Jake glanced at the suspect. Who was he working with? Miller scoffed. Probably some lowlife looking for a ransom. But something didn't sit right with Jake. "Sister Clara, did you recognize his voice? Have you ever seen this man before?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but I heard him say something strange." She swallowed hard. "He said, 'The church will regret this.'" Jake's brows furrowed. "What do you think he meant by that?" Her hands trembled in her lap. "I don't know. I don't think it was about me personally." She hesitated. "Our church has been working on a case involving human trafficking. We've been helping victims escape and find legal support. Could this be connected?" Jake exchanged a glance with Miller. This wasn't just a random kidnapping. The man on the ground let out a bitter laugh. "You pigs think you're so smart." Jake's muscles tensed. He stepped closer, his voice dangerously calm. "Why did you take her?" The man smirked. "You'll find out soon enough." Miller rolled his eyes. "Come on, we got enough to book him." He pulled the suspect to his feet. Thor let out a low, menacing growl, stepping closer, his sharp eyes locked on the criminal. The man flinched. Miller grinned. "Yeah, I'd be scared too." As the officers led the suspect away, Sister Clara reached for Thor again. The dog responded immediately, stepping forward and pressing his nose against her hand. Jake smiled. "Looks like you've made a friend." Tears welled in her eyes. He saved me." Jake knelt beside them, scratching behind Thor's ears. "He's got good instincts. He knew you were in danger before anyone else did." She wiped at her eyes. "He's a guardian angel." Thor's tail wagged slightly, as if pleased with the compliment. The paramedic cleared his throat. "We need to get you to the hospital, sister, just for precautionary checks." She nodded, but when she tried to stand, her knees buckled. Thor reacted instantly. The German Shepherd pressed against her side, allowing her to lean on him for support. His large, steady frame became her anchor. Jake watched, his chest tightening. This was more than just a rescue. This was a bond. As the paramedics helped her onto the stretcher, she looked back at Thor. "Will I see him again?" Jake hesitated. "Well, canines usually don't." But before he could finish, Sister Clara reached out and gently touched his arm. "Please," she whispered, "I need to thank him properly." Jake swallowed hard. "All right, we'll come see you." A small, relieved smile spread across her face. Thank you." As the ambulance doors closed, Jake stood in the dim light of the alley, watching the flashing lights disappear down the street. Miller nudged him. "Looks like you got another believer in the power of canines." Jake chuckled, looking down at Thor. "Yeah, I think she was always a believer. She just needed a reminder that miracles come in all forms." Thor wagged his tail. As Jake reached down and ruffled his fur, he couldn't help but feel like this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The city streets were quieter now, the flashing lights of the ambulance long gone. Officer Jake Carter stood with Thor beside their patrol car, the night's events still replaying in his mind. Sister Clara was safe. The suspect was in custody. But something about this case still felt unfinished. Miller let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "What a night." He patted Thor's back. "Gotta hand it to you, buddy. You cracked this one wide open." Thor gave a soft woof, his tail wagging slightly, but his eyes remained focused on the warehouse, as if his work wasn't done yet. Jake rubbed his chin. Something doesn't add up. Miller sighed. "Not this again." Jake turned to his partner. "Miller, this wasn't just a random kidnapping. If Sister Clara's right about her church helping trafficking victims, this guy wasn't working alone. He was sending a message." Miller frowned, considering that. "So what? You think there's more to this?" Jake exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but I do know one thing." He looked down at Thor. "We wouldn't have found her in time if it weren't for him." Thor tilted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes watching Jake closely. Miller sighed. "All right, so what now? You want to go visit her first thing tomorrow?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, I think she deserves that." The next morning, Jake walked through the halls of St. Mary's Hospital, Thor trotting beside him. Nurses and patients turned their heads, whispering as they passed by. It wasn't every day you saw a police K9 inside a hospital. They reached Sister Clara's room, and Jake knocked lightly before stepping inside. She was sitting up in bed, wearing a clean hospital gown, her bruises more visible in the daylight, but when she saw them, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "You came," she whispered. Jake smiled. "Told you we would." Her eyes shifted immediately to Thor. And so did he. Thor's ears perked up, and he moved closer, resting his head gently on the side of her bed. Sister Clara's fingers trembled as she reached out, stroking his fur. "I prayed for help," she said softly. And he came. Jake watched the moment unfold in silence. He had seen K9 officers do incredible things, track down criminals, find missing people, even detect explosives. But there was something about this moment that was different. This wasn't just about skill or training. This was something deeper. Sister Clara looked up at Jake, her eyes filled with emotion. "He knew I was there. He wouldn't stop barking, wouldn't give up until I was found." Jake nodded. "That's what he does." She smiled, but it wavered slightly. "Officer Carter?" "I'm afraid." Jake pulled up a chair, his tone gentle but firm. "The man who took you is behind bars." "It's not just him," she murmured. "If my church's work is the reason for this, there could be others." Jake's jaw tightened. "We'll look into it." Sister Clara hesitated. "I don't want to go back to the convent just yet." "You don't have to," Jake reassured her. "You'll be under police protection until we're sure there's no more threat." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she let out a breath. "Thank you." She looked down at Thor, who hadn't moved from her side. "And thank you," she whispered again. Thor closed his eyes, letting out a soft huff, as if telling her she was safe now. As Jake stood to leave, Sister Clara spoke again. "Will I see him again?" Jake hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I think we can arrange that." Sister Clara's smile returned. And as Jake and Thor walked out of the hospital, he knew one thing for sure. This case wasn't over yet. The air outside the hospital was crisp, the morning sun barely cutting through the overcast sky. Officer Jake Carter walked down the steps, Thor at his side, his ears alert and tail swaying slightly. Even after years in the K9 unit, Jake still found himself amazed at the deep connection these dogs could form with people. Sister Clara wasn't just another victim to Thor. She was someone he had saved, someone he had fought for. And judging by the way she looked at him, she felt the same way. Miller leaned against their patrol car, arms crossed. "How's she holding up?" Jake sighed. "Physically, she's okay. Emotionally, she's scared. And she should be." Miller frowned. "You really think this goes deeper?" Jake opened the car door, letting Thor hop into the back seat before turning to his partner. "This wasn't a random crime, Miller. She was targeted. We both heard what the guy said. The church will regret this." "That doesn't sound like some lowlife looking for ransom money." Miller exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Great. So now we've got a bigger mess to deal with." Jake slid into the driver's seat, glancing at Thor through the rearview mirror. "We've handled worse." Back at the station, Jake spent the next few hours digging into Sister Clara's work with the church. It didn't take long to uncover exactly what made her a target. For the past year, St. Mary's had been working with local shelters to help women escape human trafficking rings. They provided legal assistance, safe houses, even helped coordinate witness protection programs. Jake scrolled through the files on his computer, his stomach tightening. This was organized, powerful, dangerous. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, it's Carter. I need everything we have on active trafficking cases in the city." "Yeah, right now." Thor lifted his head from his spot by the desk, ears twitching. Miller walked in, holding a manila folder. "You were right," he muttered, tossing it onto the desk. "The guy we arrested? Luis Vega. Minor criminal record, mostly small-time robberies. But here's where it gets interesting." Jake flipped open the file. Miller continued. "He's got connections to a known trafficking group. Low-level enforcer, nothing big. But get this. His brother is one of the ringleaders." Jake clenched his jaw. "So this wasn't a one-man job. It was a warning." Miller nodded grimly. "And if they were willing to kidnap a nun just to send a message, who knows what else they'll do?" Jake's grip on the file tightened. "Then we need to send one back." That night, Jake found himself back at the hospital, Thor walking at his side. They entered Sister Clara's room quietly, but the moment she saw them, her face brightened. "You came back." Jake nodded. "I told you we would." Thor trotted forward, placing his head gently on the bed. Sister Clara ran her fingers through his thick fur, her expression softening. "I haven't stopped thinking about him," she admitted. "About what he did for me." Jake sat down. "Sister, I need to ask you something important." She nodded. "The man who took you, Luis Vega, he has connections to a trafficking ring. You think your church's work made you a target?" Her face paled slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "Yes," she said quietly. "We've been helping victims get out, people who had nowhere else to go." Jake leaned forward. "That means this isn't over." Sister Clara swallowed hard. "What do I do?" Jake exchanged a glance with Thor, then back at her. "We protect you, but we also need your help." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Anything." Over the next few days, the case unfolded quickly. Vega refused to talk, but the evidence spoke for itself. Phone records, surveillance footage, and Sister Clara's testimony painted a clear picture. This was a coordinated attack. The department worked tirelessly, tracking the group's movements, identifying known locations. Every lead brought them closer to shutting down the operation for good. Through it all, Sister Clara stayed under protective custody. But there was one constant in her routine: Thor. Whenever Jake and Thor visited, her face would light up, and she would run her fingers through the dog's fur, whispering soft prayers of gratitude. Thor, in turn, seemed just as drawn to her. One evening, as Jake stood by the hospital door, he watched as Sister Clara leaned in close to Thor, her forehead pressing against his. "I used to be afraid," she whispered. "Now, I feel safe again." Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. She wasn't talking about the police, or the investigation, or the protective detail stationed outside her door. She was talking about Thor. For the first time in days, Jake felt a sense of peace. They were going to end this. Together, the investigation into the trafficking ring moved fast. With Sister Clara's testimony, surveillance footage, and Luis Vega's arrest, law enforcement finally had enough leads to take the operation down, but they all knew that taking out small players wasn't enough. They needed the people running the show. Jake Carter had been in law enforcement long enough to know that criminals like these didn't back down easily. They had already kidnapped Sister Clara to send a message. If they felt threatened, they could do worse. That was exactly why she was under protective custody. Jake arrived at the hospital late in the evening, walking into the quiet hallways with Thor trotting at his side. The nurses greeted them with small smiles. By now, everyone at St. Mary's knew the German Shepherd who had saved Sister Clara. As Jake entered the hospital room, he wasn't surprised to see Sister Clara already reaching out for Thor. The canine stepped forward, placing his head on the side of her bed as she ran her fingers through his fur. "You came back again," she said with a small smile. Jake pulled up a chair. He doesn't like leaving people he cares about. Thor let out a soft huff, almost as if agreeing. Sister Clara's smile faded slightly. "Any updates?" Jake nodded. "We're closing in on them. The department is setting up an operation to take down their key players. But it's dangerous. They'll do anything to protect their business." Her fingers stilled on Thor's fur. "So, I'm still a target." Jake hesitated, then sighed. "Yes. Until we take them down, you are." She swallowed hard but nodded. "I trust you." Jake looked down at Thor, who had settled on the floor beside the bed, still watching every movement in the room. The dog was always alert, always aware. Even here, he wasn't just a companion. He was a protector. "You know," Sister Clara said softly, "when I was locked in that warehouse, I thought no one would come. I prayed for a sign. And then I heard Thor barking. I don't think it was just luck that he found me." Jake studied her for a moment. "You believe it was something more?" She nodded. "I do." Jake glanced at his partner, the German Shepherd, who had never once failed him. Maybe she was right. The sound of footsteps outside made Thor's ears perk up, his head snapping toward the door. His body tensed, his nose twitching. Jake immediately felt the shift in the air. Something wasn't right. A shadow passed under the door. Jake's hand went to his gun. Then, a knock. His muscles stayed tight, but he opened the door carefully, his other hand resting on Thor's back. It was a nurse. She smiled politely, holding a clipboard. "Sorry to bother you. Just doing a routine check." Thor growled. Jake's blood ran cold. The canine was trained to recognize threats, weapons, and deception. He never growled at hospital staff before. Jake immediately stepped in front of Sister Clara, blocking her from view. The nurse's smile faltered. "Sir?" Jake's voice was calm but firm. "Step back." The woman hesitated. Thor's growl deepened. Then she ran. Jake reacted instantly. "Stay with her!" He barked at Thor before tearing out of the room. The woman sprinted down the hallway, throwing off her nurse's uniform as she ran. Underneath, she wore dark clothing, not a nurse at all. Jake reached for his radio. Suspect fleeing St. Mary's Hospital, heading toward the back exit. Possible connection to Vega's crew. He pushed himself harder, but as soon as she reached the exit door, a black car screeched to a stop outside. The woman dove into the vehicle. Jake pulled his gun, but the car was already speeding away. Damn it! He slammed his fist against the wall. Within seconds, officers were responding. Miller was the first on the radio. We got the footage. Facial recognition should help us track her down. Jake's hands curled into fists. They weren't done with Sister Clara. Back in the hospital room, he found her sitting upright, looking shaken. Thor was still standing beside her bed, his body positioned protectively between her and the door. She looked at Jake. That was them, wasn't it? Jake exhaled. Yeah. Fear flickered across her face. They won't stop. Jake knelt beside Thor, running a hand through the dog's fur. Neither will we. The next morning, Sister Clara was moved to a secure location under police protection. Jake and Thor stayed close, knowing the threat wasn't over. The failed attempt at the hospital only confirmed that the trafficking ring saw her as a problem that needed to be erased. But they had made a mistake. Thor had marked them, and he wouldn't stop until they were brought down. 2 nights later, a break came in the case. A raid was set up at a warehouse near the docks, one of the suspected locations tied to Vega's crew. Jake and Thor were among the first units inside. The moment the door was breached, Thor lunged forward, leading the way, his powerful instincts tracking danger before anyone else could react. Gunfire erupted. Chaos filled the air. Thor dodged between crates, weaving past bullets, and went straight for the man trying to escape through a side door. With a fierce leap, he knocked the suspect to the ground, holding him until Jake secured the arrest. Within minutes, officers swarmed in, clearing the building and freeing several victims being held inside. The operation was over. The trafficking ring had fallen. The following week, Sister Clara was finally able to return to St. Mary's. Jake and Thor visited her one last time, walking through the quiet halls of the church. When she saw them, she smiled warmly and knelt, wrapping her arms around Thor. You were my miracle, she whispered against his fur. Thor licked her hand gently, his way of saying she was safe now. As Jake and Thor left, walking back to their patrol car, Jake glanced down at his partner. We did good, buddy. Thor wagged his tail, his job done. But Jake knew that if danger ever came again, his K9 wouldn't hesitate. He never did.